In 1701, a man stood at the edge of Execution Dock in Wapping, London. A crowd of thousands pressed against the banks of the Thames, jostling for a view. The hangman fitted the noose. The signal was given, the platform gave way, and the rope snapped clean through. William Kidd fell into the mud below the scaffold, alive, conscious, choking on the cold air. The crowd gasped. Some screamed that it was a sign from God, that the man was innocent. The executioner disagreed. They dragged Kidd back up the wooden steps, fitted a new rope, and hanged him again. This time, it held. But here is what makes this story unlike any other pirate tale you have ever heard. The men who put that noose around his neck were the very same men who had put a sword in his hand and sent him to sea. They were earls, lords, and powerful politicians. One of them was connected to the King of England himself. They gave Kidd a warship, a royal letter of marque, and explicit orders to hunt down pirates in the Indian Ocean. When it all went wrong, they erased their names from the record and let him swing alone. This is the story of the most famous pirate who may never have been a pirate at all, and a buried treasure that men have hunted for over 300 years. If you are new to this channel, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We go deep into real pirate history every week. No myths, no Hollywood, just documented facts and the dark truth behind them. And drop a comment below. When this story is over, tell me, do you think Kidd was guilty? Or was he the greatest scapegoat in maritime history? William Kidd was born around 1654 in Dundee, Scotland, though even that detail is uncertain, as records from the period are incomplete. What we do know is that by the late 1680s, when he was in his mid-30s, Kidd had already spent years at sea. He was not born into wealth or title. He carved his way through the world with rope-burned hands and a navigator's instinct, working his way from common sailor to captain through a combination of competence, daring, and ruthless pragmatism. In 1689, Kidd was serving as part of a French-English pirate crew in the Caribbean during King William's War. When the English members of the crew mutinied and seized control of the vessel, they elected Kidd as their new captain and renamed the ship the Blessed William. This was no small thing. A crew of violent, experienced sailors chose him to lead. He used that ship to serve English colonial interests, attacking French positions in the Caribbean. The colonial authorities noticed. By 1691, at roughly 37 years of age, Kidd had settled in New York City. He married Sarah Bradley Cox Ort, a woman twice widowed and one of the wealthiest women in the colony. She brought property, status, and connections. Kidd bought a pew in Trinity Church. He owned a grand house on Pearl Street. He was, by every outward measure, a respectable gentleman of colonial New York. The sea, it seemed, was behind him. It was not. In 1695, Kidd travelled to London. There, through a web of colonial introductions, he was brought before Richard Coote, the Earl of Bellamont, a powerful Whig politician who had just been appointed governor of New York, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. Bellamont had a proposition. Piracy in the Indian Ocean was strangling the East India Company's trade routes. Mughal shipping was being plundered with impunity. The Crown needed someone to go out there and put a stop to it. Someone expendable, someone deniable, someone not from the Royal Navy's officer class. Kidd was perfect. A syndicate was assembled behind closed doors. It included some of the most powerful men in England: Lord Somers, the Lord Chancellor, the Duke of Shrewsbury, Secretary of State, the Earl of Romney, the Earl of Orford, First Lord of the Admiralty. These men pooled funds and petitioned King William III directly. The king did not invest his own money, but he granted the commission and, crucially, took a cut, 10% of whatever Kidd seized. The arrangement was a privateer's dream on paper, a license to hunt pirates and capture French vessels, with the backing of the highest powers in the land. Kidd would keep a share, and the lords would quietly collect their profits. But read the contract carefully, and a trap emerges. The agreement stipulated that if Kidd failed to take enough prizes, He would have to repay the syndicate's investment from his own pocket. There was no salary, no stipend, no fallback. If the voyage failed, Kidd would be ruined. Success was not optional. It was financial survival. The ship commissioned for the mission was the Adventure Galley, a hybrid vessel of approximately 287 tons, fitted with 34 guns and equipped with oars for maneuvering in calm waters. She was built at the Deptford Yard on the Thames and was, by the standards of the day, a formidable predator. Kidd sailed from England in April of 1696, and almost immediately, things started going wrong. As the Adventure Galley passed down the Thames, she encountered a Royal Navy yacht. Custom demanded that Kidd dip his colours in salute. His crew, either through arrogance or defiance, turned their backs and slapped their backsides at the Navy vessel instead. It was a small act of contempt, but it foreshadowed everything that was to come. The Royal Navy would not forget it. Kidd reached New York in July 1696 and spent weeks recruiting crew. Here lay the first real crack in the mission. He could not find enough experienced, law-abiding sailors willing to sign on for a speculative pirate-hunting voyage with no guaranteed pay. What he found instead were exactly the kind of men he was supposed to be hunting: former buccaneers, deserters, drifters, men who had sailed under black flags themselves and would do so again without hesitation. Nearly a third of his crew had piratical backgrounds. Kidd had no choice. He needed bodies to work the ship. They departed New York in September 1696, headed for the Indian Ocean. The crossing was brutal. Disease swept through the crew. By the time the Adventure Galley reached the Comoros Islands off the coast of Madagascar in early 1697, roughly a third of the crew was dead from fever, dysentery, and tropical disease. The survivors were angry, hungry, and growing mutinous. They had signed on expecting prizes and plunder, and Kidd had delivered nothing. Month after month, Kidd sailed the Indian Ocean hunting pirates. He found none, or rather, none he could take. The pirates operating in those waters were well armed and sailed in packs. Kidd, with his depleted crew and single ship, could not risk engaging them. The crew's resentment festered. They began demanding that Kidd attack any vessel they encountered: merchant ships, Mughal traders, anyone. Kidd refused. He was a privateer, not a pirate. He had a commission. He had a letter of marque, but a letter of marque does not feed a starving crew. On October the 30th, 1697, the breaking point arrived. William Moore, the Adventure Galley's gunner, was on deck sharpening a chisel. He began arguing with Kidd, openly, loudly, demanding that Kidd attack a nearby Dutch vessel. Kidd refused. Moore reportedly called Kidd a coward and suggested the crew would be better off without him. Kidd's response was immediate and fatal. He seized an iron-bound wooden bucket and struck Moore in the head with it. Moore collapsed on the deck, his skull fractured. He never regained consciousness and died the following day. Kidd, standing over the body, was said to have muttered, "Damn him, he is a villain." It was murder, and it would follow Kidd to the gallows. 3 months later, on January the 30th, 1698, Kidd finally took a prize worthy of the voyage. The Quetta Merchant, also known as the Kara Merchant, was a 400-ton Armenian-owned trading vessel carrying a cargo of extraordinary value: silk, muslin, calico, sugar, opium, gold, and silver. By some estimates, the cargo was worth over 400,000 rupees, a colossal fortune. But there was a complication that would determine the rest of Kidd's life. The Quetta Merchant was sailing under French passes. Kidd inspected the documents himself. If the ship carried French papers, then under the terms of his commission, she was a lawful prize. England was at war with France. A French-flagged vessel was fair game. Kidd took the ship. He renamed her the Adventure Prize, and he kept those French passes, 2 small documents that he believed would save his life. He was wrong. By April 1698, the Adventure Galley was falling apart. Her hull was so riddled with shipworm that the crew had to pump constantly just to keep her afloat. Kidd abandoned her in a creek off the coast of Madagascar. She was eventually stripped and burned. He transferred his crew and cargo to the Adventure Prize and began the long journey home. But the world had changed while Kidd was at sea. Reports of his attacks on Indian Ocean shipping had reached London, and the political winds had shifted violently. The East India Company, furious at disruptions to Mughal trade, demanded action. The Tory opposition in Parliament seized on the scandal, threatening to expose the Whig lords who had secretly backed Kidd's voyage. Suddenly, the very men who had financed and commissioned Kidd needed him to be guilty. If Kidd was a lawful privateer, then they were his accomplices. If Kidd was a rogue pirate who had violated his commission, then they were his victims. Innocent investors defrauded by a criminal. The choice was obvious. In November 1698, Kidd was officially declared a pirate by the English government. His name was circulated to every colonial port. When Kidd arrived in the Caribbean in April of 1699, sailing into the harbour at Anguilla, he learned the truth. He was now the hunted. Kidd spent the next weeks desperately trying to negotiate. He left the Adventure Prize in Hispaniola in the care of a trusted associate and acquired a smaller sloop, the Antonio. He sailed north along the American coast, stopping at various points, sending letters to Bellamont, pleading his case. He insisted he had proof: the French passes. The documents that showed the Quedar merchant was a lawful prize. In June 1699, Kidd stopped at Gardiner's Island, a small private island off the eastern tip of Long Island, owned by John Gardiner. There, he buried a chest containing gold, silver, gemstones, and fine fabrics, entrusting it to Gardiner with instructions that it was to be held until Kidd returned. It was an act of insurance, a bargaining chip. If everything else failed, the treasure might buy his freedom. It would not. Kidd arrived in Boston in early July 1699, believing he could negotiate directly with Bellamont. It was the worst decision of his life. Bellamont received him with apparent courtesy, heard his story, accepted the French passes as evidence, and then, on July the 6th, had him arrested. Kidd was thrown into Stone Prison in Boston, one of the most wretched jails in the colonies. He was kept in solitary confinement, weighed down with 16 pounds of iron chains. The conditions were deliberately brutal, designed to break him. He spent over a year in that cell, seeing almost no one. Meanwhile, Bellamont quietly sent the French passes to London. What happened to them next remains one of the great scandals of English legal history. The passes vanished. Bellamont died in March 1701, and the documents disappeared with him, conveniently, permanently, just weeks before Kidd's trial. They would not resurface for over 200 years. In February 1700, Kidd was shipped to England aboard HMS Advice. He was placed in Newgate Prison, London's most infamous jail, a stinking labyrinth of disease and despair, where prisoners slept on stone floors and rats fed on the living. He remained there for over a year, forgotten by his former sponsors, abandoned by every lord who had once toasted his voyage. His trial began on May the 8th, 1701, at the Old Bailey. He was charged with the murder of William Moore and 5 counts of piracy. His defence was simple and direct. The ships he had taken carried French passes, making them lawful prizes. Produce the passes, and the piracy charges collapse. But the passes were gone. The court did not have them. Kidd did not have copies. His own lawyers, underprepared, underfunded, and possibly pressured by the Crown, failed to mount an effective defence. No lord came forward to testify on his behalf. No earl admitted to commissioning the voyage. The powerful men who had sent him to sea sat in their London houses and said nothing. He was found guilty on all counts. On May the 23rd, 1701, at approximately 47 years of age, William Kidd was led to Execution Dock at Wapping. The site was deliberately chosen. Execution Dock sat at the low water mark of the Thames, where the Admiralty's jurisdiction began. Pirates were always hanged there, and their bodies were left until 3 tides had washed over them, a ritual humiliation that marked them as criminals of the sea. The first rope broke. Whether it was rotted, improperly knotted, or simply too thin for the drop, Kid plummeted to the ground, slamming into the mud at the river's edge. He was dazed but alive. In the crowd, voices cried out for mercy. A broken rope was traditionally seen as a sign of divine intervention, a heavenly pardon. The authorities did not share this interpretation. Kid was hauled back up the scaffold stairs. A second rope was fetched, and this time it held. Kid dangled and choked. Death by hanging in this period was not the clean neck snap of later centuries. It was slow strangulation. It could take 20 minutes or more. But the punishment did not end with death. Kid's body was taken down, coated in tar to slow decomposition, and locked inside an iron cage, a gibbet, which was then hoisted onto a pole at Tilbury Point on the Thames estuary. There, at the entrance to one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, Kid's tarred corpse swung in the wind for more than 20 years. Every sailor entering or leaving London saw it. That was the point. It was not justice, it was a message. And then there is the treasure. The chest Kid buried on Gardiner's Island was recovered almost immediately after his arrest. Bellamont ordered John Gardiner to hand it over, and Gardiner, wisely, complied. The inventory was detailed and precise. Gold dust, silver bars, rubies, diamonds, and bolts of silk and muslin. The total value was estimated at roughly £14,000, a significant fortune in 1699, but a fraction of the cargo Kid had seized from the Quedar merchant. So where did the rest go? That question has driven treasure hunters for 3 centuries. In 2007, a team of underwater archaeologists led by Charles Beaker of Indiana University discovered the wreck of the Quedar merchant in shallow water just off Catalina Island in the Dominican Republic, exactly where Kid had left her in 1699. The hull was there, the cannons were there, but no treasure. Whatever remained of the cargo had been stripped long ago, either by Kid's associates or by local salvagers in the years after. Legends persist: treasure on Oak Island in Nova Scotia, treasure in the caves of Connecticut, treasure on remote Caribbean islands. None of it has ever been verified. What is verified is this: in 1911, more than 200 years after Kid's execution, a researcher working in the Public Record Office in London found 2 small documents filed away in a bundle of Admiralty papers. They were the French passes from the Quedar merchant, the documents Kid had begged the court to produce, the evidence that might have saved his life. They had been in government custody the entire time, filed, buried, hidden, not in the ground, but in a bureaucratic drawer where they could do the most damage by their absence. William Kidd was hanged twice for piracy. His tarred body rotted in an iron cage above the Thames for 2 decades. Every lord who financed his voyage kept his money, his title, and his freedom. Not one of them was questioned. Not one of them was charged. Was Kidd a pirate? The French passes say no. The court that convicted him without that evidence says he never had a fair chance to prove otherwise. He was a privateer handed an impossible mission, a crew of criminals, a leaking ship, and a contract designed to ruin him if he failed. When the political winds turned, his sponsors did what powerful men have always done. They sacrificed the man who did the dirty work. Kidd's body is long gone. The gibbet at Tilbury Point rusted and fell decades ago. But the treasure, at least some of it, has never been found. And the French passes, the documents that could have changed everything, sat in a government archive for 210 years, waiting for someone to care enough to look. Some stories end with justice. This one ends with a dead man, an empty scaffold, and a drawer full of truth that arrived 2 centuries too late. If this story got under your skin, subscribe and hit the bell. Next week, we are going deeper. And trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming.